All right, so my name's John Allen. I'm a former Navy SEAL, and now I'm running a nonprofit that helps Navy SEALs and fighter pilots get jobs. So I'm the CEO of Elite Meet. We founded it about a year and a half ago, and Ed Hine here is our COO.
Right, so I'm Ed. I was in the F-18 community around here out of Virginia Beach, so sorry about the noise, my bad. And I joined John as kind of a Wave 2 guy with Elite Meet, not a founder. Currently COO is a side hustle, and then I mentioned I'm in the drone business as well. And I got to know Eric through my drone business. He helped us out quite a deal, helping us develop some custom software and then later with some marketing stuff. So I've got to know his team quite well. What I'd like to do first is learn a little bit more about you guys. What are you guys hoping to get out of this? Are there any takeaways that you want to walk away with?
Jeff, what do you want to walk away with, man?
On the spot.
I was just here to meet people and get to know other marketers and see what people do.
What about LinkedIn specifically? Is there anything about LinkedIn that you were hoping to glean some insight into?
I guess maybe how to reach
More than 6 to 12%?
Yeah.
Nice setup, by the way, Eric.
Social media sucks.
Anybody else? Please.
So as I mentioned before, I work with nonprofits, and generally their entire social media marketing thing is, let's put some stuff up on Facebook every now and then. And I would like to give them some better advice other than wasting their time there.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. How to do more than just random posts every now and then.
Deliver fundraising and awareness.
Cool. Let's go with that. I think that's a great start point. So why don't we do this? We'll talk a little bit about Elite Meet and what we do, just to give you the baseline, and then we'll talk about how we use LinkedIn to drive our mission and drive our purpose. So Elite Meet, as John mentioned, what we do is we help transitioning veterans get off active duty and find meaningful employment. And really for us, a lot of that's about building a community and building a sense of that community to help us drive that effort. Ideally, in 3-4 years after someone leaves the military, they're hopefully looking back to us to say, I want to hire the next guy, or I want to come back to you and find my next opportunity, that kind of thing. So it's a little bit about the organization.
I would throw in there, though, that what we're going to get into is that if you're not aware of this, I know you two gentlemen certainly are, the veteran charity space is saturated. It is saturated. So the idea of just going on LinkedIn or going on social media and posting time to time like you are a commodity. You're not even a commodity. You don't even exist. There's too many out there. So it's all about like how can you be interesting when there's at least 45,000 others that are basically posting the same stuff in the same environments at the same time. How do you stand out? And that's what we've, I think, gotten pretty good at doing. And that's why we're here. That's why we're working with VaynerMedia, because they actually recognize that we're doing such a good job differentiating in this space that they're pro bono consulting with us and working with us to grow our business.
So a lot of what we do is not, look at the veteran with flies on his face and poor veteran, give him money, right? It's a lot of, this is our narrative and this is who we are. It's a lot about John's background and my background and how that narrative weaves into our current operation and our mission. And so we, typically speaking, we don't promote Elite Meet on LinkedIn, really, from an Elite Meet perspective. We promote our story and our member stories. And through that, then we say, oh, by the way, we're also in Elite Meet and we do this other thing. And so it's the second order effect that we're driving for. It's that association that we're looking for, right? And it's about building that brand.
It's like if you can establish your own presence, like your own personal brand, if you can do that, right? People are interested in you, and so they might be interested in your business. Now imagine if your personal story that you create and the platform you build is also tied to the business you're doing. What if you established yourself as a subject matter expert by just talking about your experiences? You have anecdotes, you have these stories you tell that kind of establish you. In my case, like I have all these experiences about translating, this unique skill set out of the SEAL teams into the private sector. I talk about it all the time, but I don't say I also run a company that helps do that. I show people that I actually know what I'm talking about. And I talk about my own experiences so people are engaged with me. And then the second order effect is, and I run a business that does this. So I've already established myself as the expert before they're seeing essentially my ask, which is get involved with my business.
We know, kind of generally speaking, there's a perception that people who fly jets make good decisions and they make them quickly, right? So I can have a whole narrative about how that's great for your business and your business and your business. But I don't have to say, come to Elite Meet and find those guys, right? That's the second order effect that we're driving for. So that's a little bit about why we use it. We primarily focus on LinkedIn. That's our number one driver mostly because we're targeting small businesses to medium and sometimes in small cases, larger size businesses. And that's where they hang out. That's where decision makers from those industries hang out. So that's really what's focusing us there. So now we thought we'd talk a little bit about the tactics, like the actual nuts and bolts of what we do and how we do it. For us, it's really a John show. John is our primary driver of content. And so do you want to talk maybe about how you create a little bit? Is that cool?
Yeah. So again, I mentioned before that our kind of environment that we're marketing in is a very saturated marketplace. There's literally 45,000 other registered nonprofits, including you wonderful gentlemen here, that are in our space, that are essentially pulling roughly from the same donor pool, right? So it's difficult to stand out. And one of the things that I early on recognized is I'm actually a pretty good writer. I come from a background that my father and my sister are both Pulitzer Prize winning journalists. I grew up writing really well and actually majored in English, so that's a strength of mine. And when I started putting content on LinkedIn, just writing about my experiences in the SEAL teams, and not so much just like pure war stories, but like stuff that you wouldn't think about necessarily, that you'd have to be an insider to know about. Writing about those experiences are naturally pretty interesting. And I started finding that if I can get people really interested in kind of some anecdote about my experience as a SEAL and my experience transitioning to the private sector, if I get them interested in that, then it's very easy to get them interested in my business, which is all about getting Navy SEALs and fighter pilots and operators jobs in the private sector. And so the content that I typically do, in fact, the majority of the content that I'm doing is written content on LinkedIn. I want to be very clear that over the past 18 months that we've grown our presence online, which to give you a sense, I'm getting between 50 and 100,000 views on LinkedIn per post. I did one this morning that I don't know where it's at now, but it's doing quite well.
It's worth noting that John didn't have a LinkedIn profile 2 years ago, just as a side note.
So I do these posts, and I've tried a bunch of different things on LinkedIn where I've done video a little bit. I've done the article, you write the published article, but far and away the most success I've had is the 1,300 character, just straight post, like a status update, but being really, really deliberate in how you market this little piece. Like your first sentence is extremely important. If you screw up the first sentence, you've wasted your time. If you don't format the post so it's easy to see and easy to understand the flow of thought, you've wasted your time. If in the first hour you haven't hit a certain mark, the post isn't going to do well, you can just delete it. There's a bunch of things that I've learned over just doing tons and tons of written content on LinkedIn that we're going to get into. I have a whole list of thoughts here that are very tactical, so we only have 20 minutes to do it. So we'll just jump right into it.
Awesome. Time spent per week generating content.
So every day I get up and I write. I just sit down and write from 4 to 9 in the morning, every single day. And I sometimes I'll get up and I'll have this idea that I'm going to write about, okay, I have this theme. Like if you go on my profile today, I wrote a post about getting into a fist fight when I grew up in Boston and getting my ass handed to me. And I'm going to tell you about why it's important I wrote about that, because it wasn't just a story. It's counter to what people believe about Navy SEALs, which is interesting. Navy SEALs are superhumans. I'm generalizing. Navy SEALs, there's movies about Navy SEALs, there's books about Navy SEAls, and here's this Navy SEAL who got his ass kicked in high school and he's writing about it. That's interesting. It's counter to what you think about me, and it draws people in. It took me like 10 hours to create that post, and it's the simplest post. So every day I'm spending at least a few hours, sometimes the entire block from 4 to 9. On average, it works out to about 10 to 15 hours a week of just pure content creation, and I don't even use it all.
So I think some of the key takeaways there, for me, deliberate time creating content, but also that counter-narrative piece is really, really important. So Jay, you're in the financial business, right? So a story about like fucking up hard would be like a really, really interesting thing. And the lesson that you learn from that, I don't know, I would totally read that for my sake.
So I would say it's 15 hours of work for like, if it goes well over the course of the week, I'll get 2 very methodically done posts that will get between 50 and maybe 100,000 total views on average. And then from that, we'll get into it. I can actually convert that into donations. I know exactly how many people I'm going to talk to. It's very deliberate, but it takes a lot of time to even have a shot at what I do every week. And I put it in every single week about 15 hours.
So from that, we're distilling those, the primary focus, that 1,300 word post, or 1,300 character post, sorry. Really, really tight content, really, really high impact messaging. A lot of times we'll ping back and forth on, does this make more sense? Is this readable? Is that readable? Because if you write your own content long enough, you start to fall in love with your own content. So having someone to ping back and forth, we've got a group of 3 of us that do that pretty regularly, we find is pretty important. When do you post?
So if you're doing written like status update posts. You guys know what I'm talking about, the 1,300 character limit, that one. That's primarily where I'm writing. The best time by far is between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. on Tuesday. The next best is going to be on Wednesday, same time frame, and the third best is Monday, same time frame. Every other time, virtually, it doesn't matter when you're posting because it's not going to get nearly the engagement it gets on Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday from 8 to 10 a.m. And I've like literally, I have like all these charts I've done of the types of engagement I get. Those are the best, Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, 8 to 10 a.m.
We kind of glazed over something, so we hit on the 1,300 word. You talked about articles previously. Now, articles for us is something that we like to have that kind of archive of information, so the background, but we don't get a lot of engagement on it, right? I mean, it's pretty much people reading headlines-ish.
I would say that a couple things has to be present on your LinkedIn. I would imagine that if I checked every one of your profiles, you probably already have this, but if you don't, it's okay. Two things, you gotta have 500 or more connections. That's a gimme. If someone goes to your profile and it says less than 500, you look like you don't know how to use LinkedIn and you probably don't use LinkedIn. You're probably one of those people who won't accept friend requests because they didn't send you a note. Newsflash, it's okay. It's a social network. People are gonna send you requests. It's okay to accept them without a note and an email address. You wanna grow your following, right? So you gotta have 500 or more. If I go to someone's profile and it says less than 500, I'm not interested, realistically. Secondly, your articles, not the 1,300 character count, but the actual published articles.
Long format,
Yeah.
embedded
You
images.
can write the crappiest article ever, but make sure you have at least one that's talking about something relative to your career so that when someone scans your page, just the fact that you've published something that's in your domain, even if I don't read it, I'm like, oh, Eric's obviously an expert about digital marketing because he wrote an article about it. We're all human, we connect the dots. He's published something in this field, he must know what he's talking about. So definitely do at least one. But I would say articles, they get lots of likes, they get lots of shares, they get lots of comments, they got no real engagement. It's people that are like, wow, you took a lot of time on this. Good job.
Right. You'll see a lot of comments or a lot of likes on whatever it is that you put in the first 2 sentences, but very, very little action on your call to action if you're putting one in at the bottom, right? So if you're gonna do it, I would very much recommend you drive that call to action way to the top, and you're still gonna see it underperform. Hopefully, your article's coming out of your writing from your 1,300 word post. There's no reason why you can't repurpose some of that content. Let's talk about how we drive traction on a post. All right, so we got super important message. One of the things that we'll do is I'll go out to my very, very close, like real network, like the people that I can really trust, and I'll say, hey, Eric, if you don't mind, I'm gonna post something here in about 20 minutes. Would you mind liking it or give me a comment on it? So you want to talk about maybe what that first hour looks like?
Well, there's two things. So there's the first hour. The LinkedIn algorithm, it's actually fairly smart and it changes fairly regularly. And I can tell without getting an update if the LinkedIn algorithm has changed because I know exactly how many views and what the like ratio is to views in the first hour. It's very important you understand how a post is doing in your first hour. For me, if I'm not achieving 600 views of a 1,300 character post in the first hour, it's trash, throw it away. Unless you're at least 5% of likes. That's because I've done hundreds of these things that a lot of them got deleted because they didn't work. You can trick the algorithm if you get a bunch of people in your circle early on to know, hey, I'm gonna do a post. Can you please comment or like my post? Likes do very little for you. It looks good, it's great. If people comment on your post, that has the same weight as actually sharing your post, especially if they tag you. So getting people to just get on there and say, good job, Ed, and tag Ed, that's as valuable as them sharing your post with some really elaborate write-up up top. So stack the odds in your favor if it's a big post you want to get out there.
I would say comments are preferred for me to shares because I can engage with comments now, right? So if someone comes on and let's say Mark jumps onto one of my posts and he says, hey Ed, I really enjoyed this. Do you have maybe you put a little teaser question in there. Now I can engage with Mark, right, in a public place, and that's going to drive more interest, right? So comments allow me to do that. It's much more difficult to do that with shares. You don't get the visibility that you'd like on the share side of the equation. Yes, ma'am.
Are you doing like a status post? So do you have a headline? Is it like a story? I mean, I'll go and look later, but I
You want to talk about above
you
and
pull
below?
up my
Do you have
LinkedIn.
an example?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just curious.
So there is no title in the status update because it really is supposed to be where you do kind of announcements and you do like the classic humble brag because that's really a lot of what LinkedIn is. But the first line, in fact, if you look at any post, like actually stop right here, don't do anything. Just go to this page. It doesn't even matter, any post.
So this one right here.
See it says see more, right? If you click that, I'm pretty sure, and this is where I actually don't know, I'm assuming that is when you get a view. That's when it goes up. Someone has engaged with your post to read what's next. Your first 2 sentences need to be written so that you're not giving away what the thing is about unless you've clicked on it. So you need to capture your audience in the first sentence, and in the beginning of the second sentence needs to be kind of rambling, so the latter half of your second sentence is the first meaningful thing you're saying. What you don't want is the most, here, go to another one that has see more on it. Like right here. Okay, right here, see more. Imagine if this is the information that he wanted to get across, and I didn't have to click see more to get to it, I'm not even gonna look at the post. And it's pretty obvious. If like, the best thing happened to me today, and it was I got hired at this company, and then you have like 80 other words you wrote or 1,000 other words, I'm not reading it.
Yeah, unless it's a counterpoint, right? And that's where that counter narrative comes back in. So if John says, I'm a Navy SEAL and I got my ass kicked, like everyone's clicking see more, right? That's interesting.
Yeah, I would also say like think about, and this is an exercise that all of you can do, think about your career profession, whatever it is. What do people assume about your career profession? Not from your peer standpoint. People online that know nothing other than the title of what you do. If you're in marketing, let's say. What are some things that are not normally associated with marketing? And probably there are things you're doing in your life that you just don't tell people about. Maybe you're like a diehard fisherman or something. Or there's something unique about you that really has nothing to do with your profession, at least the cookie cutter version of you. Like using mine as a good example, like so Navy SEALs, you can Google it and there's movies and there's books, there's all this stuff. All it's saying is Navy SEAls are like these special like superhumans. So every post I do that is counter to that is interesting because it's not what people think about SEALs. And so find whatever your narrative is that you think people think about you and write about stuff that's the opposite. You're not making it up. Find things in your life that are counter to what people believe about you. That is interesting.
So another thing that's going to happen if you post enough is something that we notice quite a bit of. We run a nonprofit that specializes in a very small subset of veterans. It turns out that pisses people off pretty routinely. That I say, we're specifically geared towards helping fighter pilots and Navy SEALs and that group, right? It's a pretty small subset of the overall veteran population. So we get haters, like, on the regular. It happens all the time. Yeah, I didn't want to say anything. It's kind of but they'll pop up in our comments. So how do you deal with haters?
Okay, so it's funny to like talk about haters, right? Like it isn't like I'm like this celebrity or something. Like there are haters on a grand scale, but there's also critics in your circle for sure. What you need to understand is that if you go to a post that someone else did, a 1,300 character post, a full article, doesn't matter, any content that someone created, and you go down the comments and you find some horrible comment about that person's content. If I see the author has responded with anything other than pleasantries, I'm judging the author, not the critic. Do not engage with anyone that says anything negative about you, and remember, if you do nothing and you just let it exist on your comment board, you look like a rock star. Like, I don't give a shit what you said about me. So like, it's actually a good thing. And another thing I would say about having haters is you've done a good job. If there are people that feel strongly enough that they disagree with you, you're making an impact. Your content is engaging.
Publicly and
right.
say like, John is an idiot.
Indifference is the worst thing you can have. And honestly, most people on LinkedIn and in social media, it's all indifference. It's all the same thing. It's all humble bragging. And today I spoke, like today, if I posted today, so excited to have spoken at Marketers Anonymous, it's a humble brag. Everyone's like, cool, dude, you spoke to a group. Good for you, bro. Like everyone does that. It's not like special for you. That's like every post on LinkedIn. You know what I mean? So like find things that are interesting. Don't do the humble brag.
No. You want to talk about InMail a little bit, right?
Sure. So all that is so when I do a thoughtful 1,300 character post, of which I'll do between 1 and 3 any week, depending on time, because sometimes I don't have the time to do it. I expect if I'm getting at least, if it does well, whatever is your well, you need to figure this out for yourself. If I'm getting between 25,000 and 100,000 views on one of my posts, I'll expect to get at least 50 messages in my inbox of people specifically reaching out saying, this thing you wrote was really interesting. I'd like to get involved with your organization. Hey, I'd like to learn more, something like that. I do not respond to all of them, not because I'm high and mighty, because it's a waste of my time. I find the ones that I know I can convert. People that have, for example, they're working for a company that clearly gives money to veteran charities, well, there's my in. I'm going to go talk to this person who's already engaged with me, and I'm going to shoot for a donation, right? Or if it's like some really, like I think VaynerMedia might be one of these. Yep. If like a company that is significant to you in some way, or a person that has significance, capitalize on that. So I get about 50, and I'll set up 1 or 2 calls. Basically, every post that does well, I can directly correlate at least 1 or 2 phone calls following up with people that I expect to convert on either from a donation standpoint or from a bringing them in as a strategic partner. Everybody else I kind of ignore because I'm doing enough of these posts and I'm getting enough engagement. That's a waste of my time. If I'm going to put in all this time to create this content, I need to make sure the interactions I'm following up with are actually worth my time.
So I think the key piece here is that we're doing all this on John's profile. It's his personal profile. It's his personal narrative. We're not doing this under the Elite Meet banner. We have an Elite Meet LinkedIn account, right? We have the business page and all of that junk. But we see very, very little traction. When I try and push Elite Meet and I say, hey, give to my veteran nonprofit,
Forget it.
We see 0 conversion rate. Like if there was a negative conversion rate possibility, we would see that.
Although I would throw out there that just on the giving portion, so we do not typically use LinkedIn to fundraise. We are a nonprofit. We do a lot of fundraising, but we don't use LinkedIn to fundraise. It was mostly because we were being so deliberate in creating these interesting narratives about the founders and the people involved in the organization that it felt almost counter to the counter narratives to start saying, and now give me your money. I liked the idea of having interactions that turned into that. But the one time we decided to actually, hey, we're going to fundraise on this platform, we raised almost $20,000 in 24 hours because we have a really engaged audience. So if you build it, they will come. It's amazing.
It's a community building thing, and that community starts with the people in the community coming from the organization, right? It's about me and John and the group of people we're surrounded by. It's not about Elite Meet and how great Elite Meet is. It's about the people within it. And we find that to be a far, far better driver of traction with the people that we want to get traction with. And then also just real world engagement results, right? It's great that we got 100,000 LinkedIn posts. That's awesome. But if that doesn't convert to anything meaningful in the real world, like people hiring our veterans, people working with us, people expanding our sphere of influence, and then ultimately like long range people giving us money, then it doesn't really matter, right? So all of this is about building that and then transitioning it into the real world for us.
Do you use a photo when you post or a
Yes.
link or anything?
Always.
I should have said that.
Yeah.
So the other thing that'll ruin your post is a really crappy picture.
Yeah, so I bet if we scroll through this, we won't find a LinkedIn post that doesn't have some kind of image. Okay, so there's one, and it has one like.
The only way you get away with something like that is if you are literally an influencer. You'll see literally like Gary Vee will be like spelling errors and all with no images.
Yeah.
He'll get 7 billion views, right? That only happens if you're in like the upper percentage of people that's already got the platform. If you don't, you got to use every single advantage you can. And so the pictures that I typically try to use are things that are like a little bit confusing. So you have to actually take a second to figure out what it is. But it's simple enough that if you take a second to look at it, you'll know exactly what it is relative to the article.
I think the other key piece here, and sorry, Eric, so we'll get to you, is this is an ever-changing thing. What's happening today is going to be different than what's happening in March, and then in Q2 it'll be different, and then in Q3 it's going to be even more different, and I can't predict what's going to happen. No one can. The LinkedIn guys don't know what they're going to do yet. So you have to be a student of it. John was talking about keeping results earlier. We're constantly bouncing ideas off each other and wargaming it and figuring out what's effective and what's not. And so that's a big piece to it, is continuing to be a student of what's effective and what's ineffective. So we've noticed that we saw video spike for a little bit. We've seen video come back down already, and that was like, what, a month ago?
Yeah.
We've already seen these things change, and it happens super, super fast.
So maybe 6 to 12 months ago, there was a technique where it was all text and every sentence was on its own paragraph.
Yeah, so you did the double indent thing?
Yeah. Is that a no-no now?
I absolutely use that.
Yeah, I totally use it.
I use
almost
pictures, but I have almost every sentence is its own paragraph.
It's almost like bullet points for me. It's how I think about writing it. So it's literally, I'll have like the teaser, I want you interested in this above the fold. You click show more, now you're seeing below the fold, and then that will, generally speaking, be driven by bullet points, and that each will be an independent thought. I'm not trying to weave a long narrative. I'm trying to go 4, 5, 6 words at most, get my point across, because people consume information super fast. And if you can't get their attention in a couple words, you're going to lose their attention. For real.
So I posted this one this morning. Okay, so by the time I was 16, I had witnessed hundreds of street fights. 2 fights were so brutal the victors went to jail. Pretty interesting, right? If you click more, everything's broken up, right? So every single sentence, if you glance at it, every single one of those standalone sentences actually has meaning on its own. Every single sentence meant something on purpose.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to go back to something you
Sure.
said about dealing with haters.
Sure.
Because I think we should qualify it for the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference between trolls who are like, just contributing
Right.
hating your feed,
Yep.
Yep.
and like negative reviews and negative experiences. I think those are opportunities for small business owners
Sure.
and other retailers to kind of steer the conversation. So if somebody has a negative review, I would encourage you to respond positively.
Sure.
Never
Yeah.
stoop to their level, but try to resolve it or demonstrate that you care about their experience. So, like you said, when other people see that interaction, you come out looking like the winner.
I like to engage with people that post negatively. Now, if someone posts like super negative and goes aggressive with it, yeah, that guy's getting ignored, right? I'm not working with that guy. But if someone comes to me and says some kind of like, hey, I don't know why you do this, that seems wrong, right? Which is, we get a lot of that. Like, I don't know why you only do this. You should help all veterans. I, generally speaking, will engage with that person and say, hey, here's why. Here's an opportunity for me to tell my story on my terms, right? And thank you for teeing that up because it's a great narrative. So yeah, I totally agree. I like engaging there.
Do you supplement with any other social media or just strictly
Um,
LinkedIn?
I do use, so truthfully, I don't have any like, here's my training on how I did this. It's more like I've seen that LinkedIn, the way that I'm creating content, the stuff that we're talking about here, it works really well on LinkedIn. It's very so-so on Facebook, and it doesn't really apply on Instagram. And I actually don't have a Twitter account, which is like heresy. So like understand that this is a very kind of biased presentation about LinkedIn. One of my goals for 2019 is to stop being like, oh, well, I'm really good at LinkedIn, so I'm just gonna keep doing it. I gotta start doing, even just within LinkedIn, I need to start doing video because that is a thing. Same goes for their platforms, so definitely use them all. But if you don't have a following anywhere, get really good at one first, and then you have a following at least on one place.
The one thing we've noticed though is we've gone to where our audience is and where we want to engage. And so that was super easy with us with LinkedIn, is because we want to engage business owners or at least business decision makers. And that's where they hang out, right? That's probably starting to merge a little bit over into Instagram and some of the other ones, but it still holds true for us now, so it becomes effective. I think that might be all the time we have. Jake, is that about right? Do we need to kill it?
Question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I read an article somewhere that if you have a lot of followers that are irrelevant, that you should actually remove those connections because when you post, your post is not relevant to a lot of those people and they won't engage, just so the algorithm penalizes you.
Just so grooming your followers list or grooming your connections list. So there's a couple things that we play with pretty consistently is where we like tag people. Do we tag it in the body? Do we tag it in the comments? Things like that that are like the really trying to trick the algorithm type things. Like, is your followers list versus your likes that ratio or percentage point or whatever it is? At the end of the day, it happens faster than we can keep track of it, is what we've noticed, I think, generally speaking.
I would also just throw out that like a good example is actually, so Jordan, who co-founded Elite Meet with me, he has something like 11,000 followers on LinkedIn. And so LinkedIn, obviously, like it's rare to have much above even like 10,000. Like 10,000 is pretty good. And influencers are in the millions, but like for the average person that's doing well, like 10,000 to 20,000 followers is actually quite a high number. And you would expect some pretty amazing traction if you have that many people seeing your content. I, on the other hand, had about 3,000 or 4,000 when I did this post, and I got 108,000 views. So I actually don't really go out and seek out connections unless there's a really specific reason that I want to friend them or connect with them. Lots of people, when they connect with me, are doing so on purpose. So I have a smaller number, but they're like really engaged, which is why now I only have, I think, maybe 6,000 followers, but I'm getting, 10x that on average in terms of engagement for every post I do. Whereas Jordan has more followers, but sees like negative 10x. He's doing fine, but relative to the number of followers, it's not nearly the same.
I think at the end of the day, we can't correlate those two things in a meaningful way. It's more about the content than it is anything else. And the content and the community that you're driving, that's ultimately the most important thing.
I also have one other caveat. So I know that in some ways, if I was listening to me talk and I was sitting here, I'd be like, dude, you're a Navy SEAL. People are interested in that. That's the only reason that people are probably engaging with your content. That would be my main criticism is you have a cheat code because you get to say you were a Navy SEAL. Not true. It took a long time to get people to even read my content. And I was going full bore, look, I'm a Navy SEAL. Check this out. No one gave a shit about that I was a Navy SEAL. Literally, no one actually cared that much. It was only when I started doing the counter narratives to what it means to be a Navy SEAL. When like this post, this is about when I gave away sensitive information to the enemy and we got ambushed in Afghanistan. Is that what a Navy SEAL does? Probably not. Really interesting. All of a sudden, they're seeing a very human side to what a Navy SEAL is. It's not the cookie cutter version. So it really isn't that we have this unique platform to stand on. It comes with like being interesting. And I think being interesting is when you kind of go counter to the norm. So end on that. Awesome.
One more question for you.
Send it. But you're killing the time here. Jake's like giving me this.
All right. Real quick. If someone sends you a connection request, do you accept every time?
No.
No.
So
Overwhelmingly, yes.
I would say it's a very, very high percentage yes. But for me, like because of our narrative, like I don't know if you noticed it, I get a ton of requests from people I don't know in like Islamabad.
Yeah.
So I do a little bit of screening, but it's not a lot.
One of the things that's it in some ways kind of makes you look like a bit of a jerk for doing it, but it's a way to filter your following, is you can actually set up your profile to where it says follow instead of connect. So the default option to like engage with your content is you click follow, and what that really means is you're saying I'm interested in your content, as opposed to connection requests, which is now I'm going to be listening and seeing all your content. It's much more like personal. You don't want that. So I have mine set to follow, so that the people that are connecting with me have taken the additional step of clicking the 3 little dots that brings up the additional menu to connect with me. And I'm happy to connect with them because I took the time. There's probably a reason for it. Sweet. There we go.
Thanks, guys. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, man. Yes.